For nearly half a century, the attic at Elvis Presley's Graceland remained sealed behind a locked door that no one in the family ever truly entered. It sat in silence, gathering dust, forgotten by time, as if it had been deliberately removed from the rest of the world. Yet when it was finally opened, what waited inside was far more disturbing and emotionally charged than anyone expected. It was not simply a collection of old belongings or forgotten stage outfits. Instead, the space gave the unsettling impression that someone had once lived there and carefully preserved their presence. The emotional weight of what was found was deeply personal and almost uncomfortable, raising a chilling question that lingered in the air. Who had been hiding in Elvis Presley's attic for all those years, and how much did the Presley family actually know about it? To understand the mystery of Graceland, we have to go back to a much earlier time, when Elvis himself first arrived at the property. On a mild spring day in 1957, a 22-year-old Elvis Presley drove through the gates of a large white mansion on the outskirts of Memphis. The house cost $12,500 at the time, which would amount to nearly $1 million today. Despite its grandeur, Elvis never changed its name. He chose to keep it as it was, Graceland. At first, it was simply a residence for a young man beginning to experience overwhelming fame. But very quickly, Graceland stopped being just a house and started becoming an extension of Elvis himself. The estate stretched across almost 14 acres of land, complete with barns, stables, and open fields where horses roamed freely. Life on the property was constantly active and often unusual. One of the most unexpected inhabitants was a chimpanzee named Scatter. Elvis often dressed Scatter in small outfits and brought him along to gatherings. The chimp would cause chaos at parties, snatching drinks from guests or tugging at clothing, and the staff would later joke that Scatter reflected Elvis's playful and unpredictable side, the part of him that rarely appeared on stage. By 1964, when British bands like the Beatles were dominating the American music scene, Elvis sought solitude within his own world. He created a private sanctuary on the property known as the Meditation Garden. Filled with fountains, flowers, and tall white columns under the Tennessee sky, it became a space for reflection and quiet thought. In contrast to his electrifying public image, this garden revealed a very different Elvis, one who was calm, introspective, and distant from the chaos of fame. However, not every part of Graceland carried that sense of peace. Other areas reflected Elvis's extravagant lifestyle. The famous Jungle Room was one such example, decorated with thick green shag carpet covering both floors and walls, along with furniture inspired by tropical design. In the basement, he built a television room capable of showing 3 different channels at once, an impressive novelty during the 1960s. In another building dedicated to racquetball, a piano was placed where Elvis would later perform some of his final musical moments, just hours before his death. Everything changed dramatically on August 16, 1977. On that day, Elvis Presley was found dead in the upstairs bathroom of Graceland. From that moment forward, the home ceased to be just a private residence. It became a frozen monument to his life, a place filled with memory, grief, and unanswered questions. In the days that followed, grief spread across the world. Nearly 100,000 fans traveled to Memphis, gathering outside the gates, crying, praying, and waiting for a final glimpse of the man they adored. Inside the mansion, Elvis's body was displayed wearing a white suit and a blue shirt. Those who saw him in that moment described it as unforgettable. On August 18th, his funeral procession moved through the city, led by 17 white Cadillacs. The service was attended by major public figures, including James Brown, Sammy Davis Jr., and Caroline Kennedy, along with Priscilla Presley, 9-year-old Lisa Marie, and Elvis's devastated father, Vernon Presley. Elvis was originally buried at Forest Hill Cemetery beside his mother, Gladys. The family hoped he would finally rest in peace. But that hope was quickly shattered. Just 2 days after the funeral, a disturbing incident took place. During the night, several individuals broke into the cemetery in an attempt to steal Elvis's coffin. Although they failed, they caused damage to the tomb before being apprehended. The incident sent a clear and frightening message. Even in death, Elvis Presley was not safe from intrusion. Deeply shaken, Vernon Presley made a drastic decision. With assistance from authorities, Elvis and Gladys were quietly moved under cover of darkness and reburied inside the meditation garden at Graceland, the very place Elvis had created for peace during his lifetime. This decision permanently transformed Graceland. It was no longer just a home or memorial. It became a heavily protected fortress built around the memory of Elvis Presley. Security measures increased significantly. New alarm systems were installed, guards were stationed around the clock, and entire sections of the house were closed off. Most notably, access to the upper floor and attic was completely restricted. Officially, the explanation was simple: privacy and respect for the family. Elvis's personal rooms, including the bathroom where he died, were to remain untouched. However, as years passed, fewer people accepted this explanation without suspicion. When Graceland finally opened to the public in 1982, after Vernon Presley's death, visitors were allowed to tour most of the estate. They walked through Elvis's kitchen, saw the famous peanut butter and banana sandwich preparations, admired the stained glass decorations in the living room, and visited his grave in the meditation garden. Yet one area remained permanently forbidden. The staircase leading upstairs was blocked off, and the attic door stayed locked. Even high-profile visitors and world leaders were denied access. The explanation never changed. The upper level was private out of respect for the family, and so it remained untouched for 48 years. On the morning of August 16, 1977, Graceland began like any other day in Elvis's final years. The curtains were drawn tightly to block out sunlight, and his bedroom remained dim and cool. At 42 years old, Elvis lived a reversed lifestyle, often staying awake for days at a time and sleeping during daylight hours. His routine was unpredictable, and long periods of wakefulness were followed by heavy sedation and sleep. His girlfriend, Ginger Alden, woke around 2 in the afternoon and noticed Elvis was still in bed. This was not unusual, so she continued her routine. However, by mid-afternoon, the atmosphere in the house felt different. It was too quiet, almost unnaturally so. Around 2:30, she knocked on the bathroom door but received no response. When she opened it, she discovered Elvis lying on the floor. His pajama bottoms were pulled down near his ankles, and his face had turned blue. Shocked, she immediately screamed for help. Elvis's close friend and road manager, Joe Esposito, rushed upstairs and immediately began CPR while someone called emergency services. Paramedics arrived quickly and transported him to Baptist Memorial Hospital while continuing resuscitation efforts. Despite all attempts, Elvis Presley was pronounced dead at approximately 3:30 that afternoon. The news spread instantly. Radio stations interrupted programming, and fans around the world were left in disbelief. The king of rock and roll was gone at just 42 years old. Later that evening, medical examiner Dr. Jerry Francisco gave a brief statement, attributing the death to cardiac arrhythmia, explaining that Elvis's heart had simply stopped. He described it as natural causes and ended the matter there. However, public doubt grew quickly. Even in 1977, it was obvious that Elvis's health had declined significantly. He had gained a great deal of weight, reaching nearly 260 pounds. His performances had become inconsistent, sometimes marked by forgotten lyrics, excessive talking between songs, and difficulty standing. The autopsy painted a more troubling picture. It revealed an enlarged heart, a swollen liver, and signs of long-term physical deterioration consistent with heavy prescription drug use. Toxicology reports later identified a combination of powerful substances, including dilaudid, quaaludes, Percodan, Demerol, and codeine. This raised serious questions about the official explanation. Why was the public told it was simply natural causes? Some believed the goal was to protect Elvis's reputation and spare his family additional pain. Others suspected a deeper issue involving medical negligence or cover-ups. A central figure in the controversy was Dr. George Nichopoulos, widely known as Dr. Nick. He had served as Elvis's personal physician since 1967. In the final 8 months of Elvis's life alone, he prescribed more than 10,000 pills. In 1976, that number reached nearly 19,000 pills in a single year. Records also showed that Elvis received 195 prescriptions in just 8 months, averaging one prescription every 1.5 days. Dr. Nick defended his actions by claiming Elvis suffered from real medical conditions, including chronic pain from an army injury, glaucoma, and a digestive disorder. He insisted the medications were necessary for treatment. He later added another controversial justification, stating that he was attempting to manage Elvis's dependency by controlling the supply rather than allowing him to seek drugs elsewhere. He claimed he was trying to gradually reduce harm while monitoring his patient. Despite these explanations, Elvis's condition in his final months was visibly deteriorating. He would remain awake for days under the influence of stimulants, then rely heavily on sedatives to sleep. His eating habits were also extreme, often involving heavy meals followed by strong laxatives in an attempt to manage weight. On the day he died, Elvis reportedly followed his usual routine. He played racquetball in the morning, returned home, and took additional medication before going back to bed. Those final doses likely overwhelmed his already weakened body. Tennessee authorities eventually challenged Dr. Nick's practices. In 1980, he faced 14 charges related to overprescribing medication. Although he was acquitted, the investigation continued for years. In 1995, the state medical board permanently revoked his license. Years later, in January 2025, archivists finally unlocked the long-sealed attic at Graceland. Wearing protective gloves, they climbed a narrow staircase into a space that had not been entered since 1977. The air was thick with dust, and silence filled every corner. Using a preserved key kept by the Presley family, they opened the door. What they discovered was not an empty storage space, but something closer to a preserved world. The attic stretched across the entire top floor and had been carefully organized into sections, almost like a personal archive. Boxes were labeled in Elvis's handwriting, each representing stages of his life, such as Tupelo, first recordings, Army days, Hollywood, comeback special, and Vegas. One box stood out, marked simply after, dated 1977. Among the first items discovered was a worn childhood teddy bear known as Bear, missing an eye and patched repeatedly by his mother, Gladys Presley, using fabric from her own clothing. In another section, they found a heavily used Bible belonging to Gladys, given to Elvis when he joined the Army in 1958. Inside were handwritten notes, underlined verses, and a marked passage from Psalm 23 written shortly before his death. There was also a Hume's high school yearbook filled with encouraging messages from classmates, a custom leather jacket from Jailhouse Rock with a note reading, "Wear this when you need to disappear," and a collection of books exploring Eastern philosophy and existential thought. Perhaps most surprising were reel-to-reel tapes labeled practice sessions from 1976. These recordings showed Elvis experimenting with gospel, blues, and even early electronic sounds, suggesting he was still creatively evolving. One particularly emotional discovery was a raw recording of Unchained Melody, performed with only his voice. Experts later described it as haunting, as if he were confronting his own mortality through music. They also uncovered handwritten lyrics, alternative versions of Suspicious Minds, and a large collection of unopened fan letters. Some came from soldiers, others from families and young musicians. One letter from 1976 even pleaded with him to rest and take care of his health, but it had never been opened. Together, these findings painted a more complex picture of Elvis Presley, both legendary and deeply human. They revealed a man holding onto memories, continuing to create, and silently enduring personal struggles while remaining connected to his fans in ways few had known. In 1918, Elvis was posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, recognizing his lasting cultural impact. Yet perhaps his true legacy is not only found in awards or records, but within the sealed attic of Graceland, where decades of silence preserved fragments of a life the world is still trying to fully understand.